Hello, Essential Therapy followers. Dr. Cindy Hodgson here, physical therapist, exercise physiologist, owner of Essential Therapies. And I have a special treat here today. I have a wonderful guest with me. This is Claudia of Health Foods by Claudia. And if you've been in Toledo any length of time, chances are you've either at least heard of Claudia's Health Foods or you know Claudia very well. And she's just very dear to my heart because she has helped me so much at the very beginning of my healing journey and just, what has really shaped a lot of my life. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking. I'm going to hand it over to Claudia. And Claudia, tell us a little bit about yourself and just so people have more of a background about you.
Well, I appreciate being here with you today. And of course, this is my first interview on Zoom, so it's pretty exciting. So, my journey has been, I've been very blessed to grow up in a health food store. I always say I'm one of those, weirdos hanging out in a health food store for 46 years. And I have to say it's been a great blessing because what I have been allowed to learn and privileged to witness in really probably at this point, hundreds of thousands of people. It's something that I wish every American could see and witness and learn. I think it's extremely important. And we're very blessed to witness people regain their health, and which is a beautiful thing. And it goes back to when you and I met. Not quite sure what year that was, but it's been quite some time now, hasn't it?
Like 27, 28 years, I figured it out. Yeah, long time.
And we've been in business. This year is our 30th year in business, which we're very grateful. And of course, again, in my own personal journey, I was very fortunate to grow up in a very iconic health food store, not only in our community, but in the United States. And that was 46 years ago. I was 16, I'm now 62. So it's been a beautiful journey and coming to know many people that have great open hearts to what we do as yourself. I'm really honored to be here with you. So thank you.
Well, and thank you, because your time I know is so valuable. I mean, even just going in the store, if you're there, you're just, there's swarms of people just wanting to glean from your knowledge. And it's, wow. I'm not being slight at all by saying it is so important. And people don't know where to turn, and you have always been there, and it's been such a great help for people. So specifically, there's so many things we could talk to you about, Claudia. So yeah. Today we are going to focus on something that was extremely important for me, and I think for many people, yeast or candida, and you may know it as the yeast syndrome. And so we're going to talk about what is the yeast syndrome, what is candida, what is it all about, why is it important, and what do we do about it? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, and then I will tell maybe a little bit about my story just here real quick. I was very fatigued. This was at the beginning of PT school. I had already met you. I'd kind of heard about this whole yeast thing, and as time went on, I was in PT school holding a very demanding schedule, extremely fatigued. Just kind of aches and pains. I just couldn't figure out what was going on with me. I was eating a very well-rounded vegetarian, however, diet. And I just didn't know what was going on. And so finally I decided, it was in December, I had decided that after the holidays, I would go cold turkey and I would do what you had told me I needed to do. And so that led itself into some difficulties at first, but it really gave me my life back, and it enabled me to really focus on my studies, and it just changed my life and changed my thinking about nutrition from then on. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you tell us what we should know about yeast.
Well, it's actually one of my favorite conversations that we have had over the years with really thousands of people. The Yeast Syndrome, written by Dr. Trowbridge, came out in 1986. And of course, I've read hundreds of books over the years. And it was one of those books that when I read it, it just made sense to me. It was like, well, that just makes sense. It was very simple for me to understand. I could really wrap my head around it. And basically, I do believe that yeast overgrowth is epidemic in the United States. And when we look at culturally how this nation has been raised and the influences that we've had through the food supply, through, the use of antibiotics, through not only that people take for their health when they don't feel well, but also antibiotics are in the food supply. It was clear to me that this was a conversation that everybody needed to have, everybody needed to hear and learn this information. And of course, over the years, I've learned a lot to understand it. But at the end of the day, very simply put, I think it's fair to say the American public generally is very deficient in the good flora. Mm-hmm. Probiotics are so essential to human wellness, human health. They're critically important to so many levels, for so many levels of human health. And in this culture, when we look at so many generations have become deficient in the flora, it's easy to understand why candida, and as I call it, the bad guys, have proliferated and taken over so many people's health. So the idea of fungus is sometimes it kind of freaks people out. But when we really get into a full conversation, it's important to me that people understand there are hundreds of symptoms to candida and fungal overgrowth. It's amazing over the years. We've put people on yeast-free protocols for very simple kind of blatant, toe fungus, vaginal yeast infections, whatever, skin eruptions. But along the way, we witnessed all these other imbalances start to come back into balance. So over the years, it was very easy for me to see that, wow, this is a big issue. This is an important issue. Many people are dealing with this. They just don't realize it. And so it's just a really important conversation. I'm glad we're having it today. So this is Dr. Trowbridge's, this book has been around since 1986. We still stock it. Many other books on yeast overgrowth have come in the market. But, I tell people this book is it's not been revised. It's a little antiquated, but I think the fundamental teachings in this book are very important. People read it, they gain a very clear understanding of what they're really dealing with. So in the long story short, the good guys are meant to be up here, which should keep the bad guys, whatever they are, fungus, bacteria, parasites, viruses, in check, in balance. But in this culture, and especially in this day and age, we have millions of people that truly are very, very deficient in the good soldiers. And the yeast overgrowth is just happily growing. And one of the main things that it's being fed through is sugar and sugar forming foods. It's interesting, every day at the store, hundreds of people are coming in every week, and their biggest issue, and many people have become very clear on this, they're struggling with sugar addiction. It's a serious addiction in the United States. A lot of people want to make light of it. But at the end of the day, I think when people are very honest about their health, they recognize when they eat goodies and sugary things, they might feel, it might be nice when it's here, but once it gets in the body, they don't feel so good. They might be fatigued. Some people get headaches. They get all kinds of symptoms, bloat, gas, digestive issues, excuse me. So there's a lot of imbalances that are actually being exasperated because the fungus is living in everybody and it's happily just growing because of all the junk and the goodies everybody is eating. But the reason I think that this is such an important conversation, it's not just the refined sugary diet. It's all the antibiotics that are feeding it, because everyone knows when anyone takes an antibiotic, it destroys the good flora. And because I believe people are so compromised in their flora already, the antibiotics are just exacerbating a lot of issues. But the other piece that comes into this, which we do active education on, is the impact of industry and modern day toxins from petroleum. We know that petrotoxins are part of what's feeding many of the imbalances in the human body, and also along with all that, fungus. And we're all being exposed to petrotoxins, and we can't avoid them. They're part of our everyday life. So for me, this conversation brings in a lot of what's going on in this day and age, and especially for people that have been raised in this culture and the American diet.
So when you say flora, just to clarify for people, you're speaking of the microbiome, right?
Microbiome, yes.
So I wanted to throw that word in there because I'm finding more and more people are becoming aware of that word, which is great. I mean, 30 years ago, and when I was first doing this, nobody talked about that. It was like, oh, Acidopolis, was the only word we heard of, and you taught me all about that. And so when people start to realize that this microbiome, there's good and bad, and there should be a balance, and the way that we live does not promote that balance, correct?
Correct.
So there's always yeast in the body, but it should be at a level that is
balance. Yes. And it's interesting. I think back when I was a young woman in my early 20s, and I'd say to customers, really, when you change what you eat, you're going to feel better here, but you're going to think better here. And one of my favorite books along the way, The Psychobiotic Revolution. This is a great book. This is all about the research that has come out over the years, where researchers are actually finding the gut-brain connection. And it's a very important connection. It's a very powerful connection. And literally, our gut is the gateway to our brain, to our immune system, and our endocrine system. And that's a whole lot of important stuff. I write a lot of articles on this. I speak about it quite a bit. When I had a radio show several years ago, I talked about it all the time. So this idea of the microbiome, it seems like a simple little word, but it's a big word, because there's a whole world going on within us, within that digestive tract, that seemingly it doesn't seem like a very long track. From mouth to rectum, it's, whatever that is in an average person, 2.5 feet, maybe in a tall person, 3 feet. But when we uncoil that tube, it's significant in length. It can be anywhere from 25 to 30 feet in an average adult. That's a long tube with lots of nooks and crannies. And within those nooks and crannies, lots of things are living in there. So the microbiome is all about the good guys that should be, we should have more of the good guys in that world. But unfortunately, with the degradation of the food supply and all these things that we've been up against for generations, the flora, the probiotics, whatever term you want to use, they're getting diminished. So all the other critters are happily thriving and just growing in all those little nooks and crannies of that digestive system. So there's a whole world going on in there. And it's important that people understand that. Because I think that, years ago when I was a young woman, I would say to people, don't eat, whatever. Don't eat hydrogenation. Don't eat sugar, whatever. People don't want to be told what not to do. And the more that we educate so they can truly understand from something that makes sense to them, when people understand that that's a long tube and it matters what you put in there. I mean, a lot of the American diet, because it's refined, it's, dairy, it's sugary, it's mucousy, it's all getting stuck in there. And as it's getting stuck in there, all kinds of critters are enjoying the end result of those toxins that are just sitting in there. So the microbiome is a big word, it's a big idea, and it's a very important idea for people to really learn and understand. In fact, recently I had a guy tell me, you wrecked my, I don't enjoy donuts anymore. You wrecked it for me. Now when I eat a donut, I'm thinking, okay, how's it getting out through all that plumbing? Because he's a plumber. So when I talked to him about, look at it as plumbing, and it made perfect sense to him. And it's funny. So I think when people are given very simple understanding about the human body, that's what they're thirsty for in this day and age. It's easy for people to come up with all these big words and these big ideas, but at the end of the day, we all have this beautiful, magnificent body. We should all have a very simple, basic understanding of how it's working. So the microbiome is critically important to brain health, to digestive health, to immune health, to endocrine health, which is everything that's regulating the body.
So thinking about, how does someone know if they might have a problem with this yeast? I just want to point out a few things that I see regularly. Of course, doing physical therapy, myofascial release. I'm focused a lot on people's pain and dysfunction and difficulties,
Yes.
with their body. What I
Yes.
find all the time is that people have a hard time just really even feeling inside their body, like you mentioned about the sugar. And actually this was me many years ago when I didn't realize that when I ate something sugary I felt horrible 20 minutes later. And so
Right.
it took me a long time to begin to feel that. Now it's I'm very much aware of whatever I eat, how it makes me feel. I think that would
Yes.
be, the very first thing. If we could teach people something, that would really be helpful.
Yes.
Notice the food that you're eating, how is it making you feel? But some people just aren't able to feel that right off the bat, right? So, some of the things that I see in a lot of my patients are, headaches, for example. So that's something I always think about. Headaches were a big thing for me. I had a lot of myofascial restrictions. That was part of it, but I also think part of it was diet. So,
Yes.
when you look at this list of things that overgrowth of yeast can produce, it's just so long. But another one that sticks out is inflammation. So I see a lot of people with aches and pains all over their body. There's that
Right.
that's going on. There's, like you mentioned, skin issues, allergy issues, a whole slew of things. And so that book that you mentioned, the Yeast Syndrome, that was the one
Yes.
that I had gotten. And I know that there are some great questionnaires in there that really helped me. Is that's the book that has
That's one of the reasons I still use it,
yeah,
because it's many pages of all these different symptomatic issues. I mean,
yeah,
he lists, I don't know how many, I've never counted them, but there's several pages.
right,
So, that's something that's been important to me over the years, is teaching people, look, our body, it's all one machine. We're all connected. You cannot separate it. When you
yes,
separate it, then you've got, I mean, obviously we're all connected. And that's what the simple thinking that we need to get back to. So we've been teaching people for years, you got to find your trigger foods, because when doctors are looking for allergens, those show in the blood.
hmm,
But trigger foods don't show in the blood. What they're doing is triggering something, triggering some form of inflammation. And that inflammatory response can come out in many ways. So, so this idea of connecting the dots,
hmm,
you know, feel what you're feeling after you eat something. What do you listen to your body, tune in. This is what we teach people, tune inward. And I believe we all have an inner doctor. I believe that it's an innate wisdom. And it's funny how many, again, after working with thousands and thousands of people, how many people will say, well, geez, I always felt like that, food was giving me a problem. But
hmm,
we're teaching people, trust trust what you're feeling,
hmm,
tune in, embrace your own health, become your greatest advocate. And when your body is talking to you, trust it, because that's, symptomatic expression is the language of the body. That's how it works. And when you have something that's flaring up, your body's talking to you, honor that, pay attention to it. Don't just say, oh, it's some symptom and, cover it up. The body is speaking for a reason. So inflammatory triggers are really all, and a lot of the research now is proving the inflammation is starting in the gut. It's just coming out in many ways. So the list of, symptomatic expression, we have people that are dealing with a history of mood imbalances and, as you said, headaches and, chronic infections, chronic sinus, chronic ear, chronic urinary, chronic respiratory. So that's why I think Dr. Trowbridge's book, even though it's not one of the newer books, he really, in my opinion, has done the best of saying, okay, here's the checklist. There's hundreds of symptoms. What are you dealing with? And then he's very clear on how do you, by changing what you're eating, how you're helping yourself not feed the fungal overgrowth. And I think that that's an important part of the conversation.
So with that, then someone comes in and they're telling you they have, symptoms XYZ, and they've tried all these different things, and you suspect yeast might be a part of it. How would you go about it? What advice can you give someone who might be hearing this now, like, oh, gee, maybe I have this? How would I know? And what would I do? What's the treatment of it? And then what factors come into that? And we talked a little bit about blood type and that sort of thing. So tell people, what do they do?
You know, I'm a fan of, I truly believe everyone needs probiotics every day of their life. And the more we learn about probiotics and what probiotics and now prebiotics, now we have a better understanding of what prebiotics are actually doing in the microbiome, what they're doing in that world. They're very important. And of course, the prebiotics go back mainly to fiber. So fiber, you know, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, right.
It's an important conversation because when we look at the American diet, what has it been stripped of? Fiber. So, you know, that fiber is very, very important to feeding the right things. And I think that, you know, the more that we understand, you know, I always think about back in the 1960s, you know, moms were convinced they didn't have to nurse their babies. And that's a big deal because the good soldiers truly are passed generation to generation through, of course, breast milk. And I remember years ago when I was a young woman and probiotics, there were only a few on the market when I started, you know, and back in the 70s. And of course, Bifido was for the large bowel, Dophilus was for the small. Okay. But what's amazing to me is how many strains have actually been identified now. It's fascinating stuff, but they're all important. And that's why I always start with, no matter age, who, you know, no matter who it may be, to me, it just makes sense. Everyone needs more of the good guys. So that's where we always start. We always start with get those good probiotics in the body. And of course, now there's many choices. Some are enteric coated. There's different delivery systems. You've got powders. You've got some that are transported with food. I think it's important, of course, to always know the quality of the company you're taking. And then there's different delivery systems that we use. But in the big picture, flora is essential. So that's where we always start. Okay. The list of and again, you know, not only is it important to bring up the good guys, but it's essential to quit feeding the bad guys. And that's where the diet, you know, the food choices really are very important for this whole conversation. So
tell people, what are those? What are those food choices? How do you guide people?
What we know is that anything that breaks down to sugar feeds yeast. So the list of what people can eat is really the easier list to talk about.
Exactly. Okay.
Because what we know helps to keep everything balanced is clean, quality, properly raised animal protein, okay, veggies, good fats. Mm-hmm. Everything that feeds yeast is on the other list. And it's usually everything that everybody loves: the bread, the potatoes, the corn, the pasta, you know, all this stuff. So,
and even fruit, right? So can you say something about fruit? Because that's one thing I hear people say all the time. Oh, you know, I eat really well, and they start talking about their foods, and there's fruit in there. So explain that a little bit too.
Well, here's my feeling. Remember, this is 46 years of what I've learned and witnessed over the years, and I'm always going to share what I've learned firsthand. And what I really believe is this. First of all, Dr. Trowbridge, when he set up that original food protocol, he made it into 4 phases. Phase 1 was 3 to 4 weeks. And of course, phase 1 was strictly animal protein, veggies, good fats. Nothing else was on the list. Then you slowly start moving phase to phase, incorporating different foods. And if you had a symptomatic response, you knew that that food was not what you should be eating. Mm-hmm. In his original protocol, he didn't have anyone incorporate fruit until after 3 to 4 weeks. And it's interesting, I see a lot of the newer kind of yeast philosophies, and you know, people are doing fruit right from day one. I personally don't agree with that. I think it's very important to fruit is wonderful. Fruit is nature's sugar, but I truly believe it's fair to say when you have a culture of people that have been raised on sugary foods every single day of their life, fruit can add to that in the big picture. So I'm a fan of sticking to, when you get on a food protocol, focus on clean. And again, we always specify clean animal protein, not mega farm. God only knows what they did to the animals on those farms. But clean, ethical, grass-fed, free-ranging animal protein, clean veggies. And I encourage people, go 3 weeks like Dr. Trowbridge suggested, then start adding in whatever, low glycemic, the berries and whatever it might be. But it's interesting, years ago, we would guide all these people to get on a yeast-free protocol. And there were times when we would see, let's say, a husband and wife, eating according to a yeast-free protocol. One was feeling great, their brain fog was going away, their inflammatory issues were going away, they were losing weight without even trying. Yeah. But then the person next to them was feeling sluggish and not losing weight, and their energy was, not what it should have been. And I always questioned that. Why is that happening? Why is it one person eating a particular way is feeling so much better, but another person eating a particular way was feeling not so great? So along my own personal journey, when
Dr. D'Adamo
came out with his Eat Right for the Blood Type, to me, this was the answer. And when this book came out, I don't know, 20 some years ago, or whatever it was, 22 years ago, whatever it was. And I read this, and when it first came out, and it was just one of those books that made pure sense to me. Just like, well, that just makes sense. So after all these years, I encourage people to eat from the understanding of a yeast-free protocol, but to do it through their blood typing, because we have seen so many people do much better. And that's another conversation we could have at another time, but A's generally don't do so well with animal protein. Challenges their gut a bit. So, there's the original protocol is really more compatible for the meat eaters, and anyone that's familiar with the blood typing, O's are generally the carnivorous ones. And we see a lot of O's that do very well on a yeast-free diet. A's generally can struggle with it because they don't do well with a lot of meat, and specifically, generally, they don't do well with red meat. They do better with chicken, turkey, fish, or as they're Dr. D'Adamo says in his book, they're the natural vegetarian. I know that some yeast books have been written for vegetarians. I respect those approaches, but at the end of the day, we see a lot of people that just can't seem to get over the hump with a lot of their health issues if they're not eating enough protein, animal-based protein. So at this point, we still guide people to a yeast-free diet, but now we do it from a blood typing protocol, and it seems to work very well for a lot of people.
And that just makes complete sense for me. I know I was a vegetarian for 7 yeyears, and during this time when I first met you, and I am O blood.
Right.
And so, and I really resisted that whole idea because for just other reasons, ethical reasons or whatever, I just didn't want to eat animals. And but I wasn't doing well. I think a lot of it was the yeast, but even still, I just did so much better with that. And so it makes complete sense to me that is factored in there.
Yes.
I know a lot of people who are vegetarians and do really well. And then I always would, wonder, well, why couldn't I do that? But that does make sense to me.
Yes.
The whole blood typing.
Yeah. And, I have great respect for people that from an ethical or philosophical place don't want to eat animal for whatever reason, because of the harm mega farms are doing to the environment, the animals, whatever it might be. I respect it and I honor it. But at some point, when we see, so many people that have been non-meat eaters, and, a year or two later, they come in and they don't feel well. To me, at some point, we have to do what we need to do for our own health. so we can function in a quality way on a daily basis going through our life's journey. So we have a lot of people that just, the vegan vegetarian thing does not work for them, and almost always. Now, it's fair to say there are A blood types that, you know, a lot of people, especially we see this in young people. We have a lot of, you know, teenagers that come in, they don't want to eat animals. They don't want to eat something that has a mom. And again, my heart is with them because as a young woman, I was there. Yeah. I mean, when I started working in a health food store at 16, you know, we had a whole food service right there. You know, we were sprouting everything and living on wheatgrass. And, you know, I was vegan for almost 4 years, but then it hit my health very, very hard. And that was many years before the blood typing protocol came out. And so I found through my own process, it was not compatible for me. And I was doing it right. But we see a lot of young people, you know, they're coming in and they're just living on carbs and they're calling themselves vegan. Well, yeah. That's not being a vegan. A vegan is there's an educated philosophy that goes with that. So it's balance. It's all about balance. But at the end of the day, you know, I really believe we just have to sometimes make these decisions for ourselves that it might take time for our heart to catch up with it, but it's interesting when people feel better, then they can embrace it. So
true. I mean, it is hard in our environment, in our society to stick to this type of a eating plan. I think long term, you know, yeah. But I know for my own history, like I several times, you know, have gotten off of that wagon of eating, you know, only the foods that I know are great. Like I am a classic, you know, I would do fabulous all the time if I just had the protein and very non-starchy vegetables and very minimal fruits. I mean, but it's really hard to eat like that all the time. So over the years, you know, in the last 28 years, I've had times where I did really good for a while and then I kind of fall off. And then of course, when I was having kids, it was really, really hard and you're doing all this mom thing. And, you know, I have a couple of times and even just recently, so, you know, it's been really busy for us. We moved our studio and things have been crazy. And so I kind of gradually start letting things come in. And it starts to feel like there's an underlying craving that is hard to explain. And that's truly the yeast. Don't you feel like that's a thing?
Yes, it is. But it's also, remember, this gut-brain connection.
Yeah.
They have actually found you know, how that happens. And at the end of the day, either the good guys are talking to the brain or the bad guys are talking to the brain. Okay. So we understand what cravings are, and it's not the good guys that are causing those cravings.
Right.
So there's so many reasons to bring our microbiome back into a balance, and they're critically important. But I do think, you know, it's interesting. When I was a young woman and I was like, oh, if you don't do it, don't, you know, I was all or nothing.
Right.
But, you know, hopefully as we get older, we get wiser. And at 62 and working with so many people, I've learned to understand life is a journey for each of us. And we, you know, just to do the best we can, rather than look at what we're not doing. I encourage people, look at what you are doing for yourself every day and feel good about it. And if it's just little tiny baby steps, applaud it. Right. Wrap your arms around it, your heart around it, because it's those baby steps that eventually get us to the distance get us to the goal we want to be. So I've really changed how I look at things. Humans have a lot of emotional attachment to their food. And so all this has to come into play. But at the end of the day, when we're able to bring up the good guys, quit feeding the bad guys, and then of course, you know, when somebody is on a yeast-free protocol, we get them on the supplements that we know help support the body to deal with the overgrowth of fungus. And so that's also part of the story. So,
but I will say,
that,
yeah,
they do get their health back.
Right. And I agree, like the whole, like making small changes and all that's helpful. But I mean, maybe I'm just one of these kind of all or nothing people sometimes, but I've done that too in the past of like, well, try to clean things up a little bit and I just can't get ahead. So that's something. And so, you know, our theme for this month is Detox December, right? So,
Yeah.
and traditionally I've done around this time of year, right before the holiday starts to come, because it actually helps my desire for those foods that I know I shouldn't have to be much less if I get very, very clean
Yeah.
for a couple of weeks. And so for those who maybe are out there who've tried just kind of, you know, I mean, they're taking their probiotics, they're trying to eat, you know, minimal processed foods and sugars, but they're still not feeling a change. They really might need to do something a little bit more drastic. I think, I don't want to use the word drastic, but I mean more focused. So I've seen a couple of different, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because two major times in my life since those early days where I was first met you, I had, and now the one that was most profound, it was when I was getting back into doing manual work after my kids were little, and I was, you know, adding hours to my week, and my hands were getting tired, and I had a lot of soreness, which now I know is just inflammation building.
Right.
And my knuckles were so strained. I was wearing these little braces around the knuckles that the OTs had given me at work just to kind of get through my day.
Yeah.
And I finally realized, okay, I got to do something. I got to do a major cleanse again, because, you know, I wasn't feeling well. I just knew it was time. And it had been years, because I hadn't done one since I was pregnant, you know, and it had been several years. So I started, and I did exactly like you were talking about, animal proteins and the greens, really sticking with, you know, non-starchy vegetables of any kind. On day 9, I woke up and did my normal routine, you know, just showering and everything. And typically I would need to put those braces on my fingers right away in the morning. I got out to the kitchen, I started making my food for the day, and I realized, oh, don't have my braces on my fingers, because like overnight on day 9, I didn't have the inflammation, I didn't have the pain.
Right.
And I was able to take those off, and I never put them on again. And that was, I think, 8 or 9 years ago now. And so, you know, for me, just like cleaning things up a bit, even though I was pretty clean with my diet, it just didn't work. I needed that, like really getting rid of all of it so that my body could start anew.
Yes.
And refresh. So do you still recommend that kind of thing to people? How do you handle that?
I do. And one thing I just want to say in regard to food, greens, greens, greens. You know, chlorophyll is so essential to the human body. It's important for so many things, for restoring at a cellular level, for helping the body to deal with some toxins. So through all this conversation, veggies and greens are so important. But one of the things that, you know, when people are changing their diet and bringing up their good flora, there's different products that are important for helping the body deal with the overgrowth. And over the years, one of the products that I encourage people to start with it's a plant enzyme which helps to break down the biofilm of the fungus. And that's one of the reasons that our immune system can't get to the fungal overgrowth that's growing in our body. It has a protective shield around it. And that biofilm is cellulose. And of course, we can't digest cellulose. So the product that I like to start people on is known as Candidase. There's a couple of them. There's Candex, there's Candidase, both very similar formulas. But that's where I start everybody. And what's very interesting, because it's enzymatically eating away the biofilm of the fungus, which allows the fungus to become more vulnerable. And then as we add in other immune supportive supplements, now the immune system can get to it. And it's interesting, a lot of people that come to us and they'll tell me their sugar craving is bigger than they are. And it's a lot of people that walk through the doors making that acknowledgement. That's the product I start them on, because the very process of weakening that biofilm, oftentimes, not for everyone, but for many, their sugar cravings will start reducing. And some people, in fact, the other day I had a husband and wife, they've been on it for 2 weeks, and they were both starting to experience that their sugar cravings were diminishing, which, you know, they came in right before Christmas because they were living on all kinds of sugar and recognized it was not helping them. So, you know, everyone is different. That's the beauty of human applied nutrition, is that we learn to understand health at a personal level for an individual. So everyone heals differently, but for many people, when you get on a product that will weaken the biofilm, it can make all the difference on that journey, and really help with those cravings. So
great. So you could start with that, and that might make doing a stronger cleanse or a more restrictive cleanse easier for you.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, years ago, because, you know, since 1986, when this book came out, immediately I was sharing information and guiding people on this. And, you know, back then, before we had the plant enzymes that break down the biofilm, all these beautiful immune supportive products that are antifungal, Podiarco, caprylic acid. Oftentimes we'd see people go into a detox crisis, which of course is what Dr. Trowbridge talks about in his book, the Herxheimer reaction. And, you know, yeah. And I think people are very busy now. You know, a lot of people don't have time to be in bed for a week with a detox reaction. So when the plant enzymes came on the market, and I don't remember exactly what year they did, 20 some years ago. And when they did, it just made sense to me. That's where we need to start, people. So we can weaken that fungal growth, then everything else can do its job better. So.
Right.
All right.
You know, is it safe to say that if someone has never done a yeast cleanse of any kind, because you mentioned that it's a kind of an epidemic really in our society, is it something that everybody should maybe consider just looking into this, and maybe even seeing the questionnaire? Maybe I can even make that available in the comments or something here.
You know, I think I think when it comes to our health, especially in this country, we need to get back to simple basics, things that make sense. And I love when people just will, you know, I tell them what I have to say and they'll say, well, gee, that just makes sense. And I love when, you know, we have a lot of docs that come to us, they refer to us, which we're very grateful. We have a lot of nurses from the medical community that come to us. And especially when they will say, well, gee, that just makes sense. Sounds simple and it makes sense. It makes, you know, I love that, because health should make sense. This is the thing. It shouldn't be this big mystery. It belongs to each of us. And it should be, you know, to me, even though the body works at a very complex level, especially when you talk about cellular biology and get into the immune system and all these different things, at the end of the day, it should make sense. It's a machine. And what we put in matters, and what we put in better come out whole, solid. You know, these are just basics of how the machine runs. So there's many symptoms, and and we always stock the yeast syndrome. We've stocked it all these years. It's always, you know, so yes, I think that checklist is a good one for people.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Well, I just appreciate all of your knowledge. And I hope this encourages a lot of our followers and just anyone out there who wants to know a little bit more about this whole topic, because it's just rarely talked about. I feel like the medical community doesn't really mention it much. It's something that, you know, sometimes I bring up and people have no idea. Other times they may have heard of it. But, you know, we have a great resource right here in town, and want to encourage people to come and see you. It's at Health Foods by Claudia on Secor Road. It's right near Monroe, right? It's right near Monroe and Secor. They're back where your very first place was when I first met you.
Yeah, we're between Monroe and Sylvania Avenue, and we're right on Secor. So, and listen, I appreciate and honor what you're doing as well. The voices in this country that have the heart, the courage to teach people. We can all learn to be the best advocates for our own health. So what you're doing is very important, and I appreciate that you asked to do this interview today. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I hope we can have another talk soon about maybe something else that would be important. There's so many things to share.
Lots to talk about.
And
Yeah.
yeah. So just have a happy holiday season to you, Claudia. And thank you so much for
to you and your family.
Thank you for
I
all that you do.
Thank
And
you.
I will have some links in this below as well to help people get sent over to your website and your blog and all the great knowledge that you have to share.
Thank you. I'm working on blogging from my website more actively, so we're getting some good articles on there, and so anyway, thank you.
Great.
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you for watching, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.